On today's edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, I'm going to tell you what the likelihood is that Milton Williams is still a Philadelphia Eagle in 2025. All that and more coming your way on this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day, whether you're listening in Philadelphia or you're in Italy, Brazil, Buffalo, New York like I am, doesn't matter. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel, right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So Milton Williams is one of the big-name free agents the Philadelphia Eagles have to make a decision on in just a week and a half at this point. Free agency is right around the corner. And unlike yesterday when I talked about Josh Sweat and how I just think there is a slim to none chance that Sweat's back in Philadelphia next year, I just don't think he'll be worth the contract he gets. I think he's a good pass rusher that'll get paid like a great one. I think there's a lot of alternative options you can get for a little bit cheaper, and they could probably match the production of a Josh Sweat. And I think it's a loaded edge class in the draft, and I think that's another avenue they can take. And it does sound like Josh Sweat wants a payday. So I don't think, even though he's only 27 years old at a premier position, I don't think Josh Sweat is back next year. But Milton Williams, that's a different story, because normally in a vacuum, that is the exact kind of guy that you want long-term, that you would invest long-term in. He is an elite pass rusher on the interior, which is like gold. Like, that is such an important player to have in it. An elite interior pass rusher is huge. He's smack dab in the middle of his prime. And again, he plays an important position, and you drafted him. That's homegrown talent you want to keep long-term. He's young. That's the guy you keep all the time, right? That's what Howie Roseman does. He invests in the trenches, and he never lets those guys leave. Milton Williams projected, though, to get about $20 million a year annually in his next contract on the open market. Was seen wearing a Clutch Sports hoodie in his locker room cleanout interview after they won the Super Bowl. So I think the message is clear that he's going to want that $20+ million a year. So normally, that is a contract that Howie Roseman, I feel like, would be comfortable giving a player of his age, of his production, of his position. But you do have to think about the Jalen Carter of it all, like the Jalen Carter effect. And I'm not saying that Milton Williams was a product of Jalen Carter. Again, I think he is, in his own right, an elite pass rusher on the interior, whether Jalen Carter is next to him or not. I think he's one of the best one-on-one defensive tackles in football. He was number one this year in the league in pass rush win rate when you combine the regular season and the Super Bowl. 2 sacks against Pat Mahomes in Super Bowl 59, a strip sack. He is a great player. I'm not trying to say he isn't. And if they paid him that $20+ million a year, I'd be okay with it. I think he is the perfect guy to have next to Jalen Carter. But at the same time, Milton Williams or whoever is next to Jalen Carter, Moro Ojomo, Jordan Davis, a draft pick you bring in, a free agent signing, like, they're always going to have the mismatch. Normally, they're always going to have that one-on-one because Jalen Carter is going to command so much of the offensive line's attention, as he should. And so, yeah, Milton Williams did an incredible job of taking advantage of those opportunities, better than anybody in football. At the same time, I think Moro Ojomo, next year with more playing time, can do that at a really high level too. Is he going to be Milton Williams of 2024 next year? No. That, again, was one of the best defensive tackles in football. But Moro Ojomo, in his own right last year, had a top 15 pass rush win rate for all defensive tackles, according to Pro Football Focus. Jalen Carter, again, he gets so much attention that it gives talented players next to him opportunities to win on a consistent basis. And again, yeah, Milton takes it to an elite level of taking advantage of that. But I think a Moro Ojomo breakout could be coming next year. I think there's some other guys in the open market that could be cheaper than Milton Williams that might still be very productive. The draft, you heard me mention how good the edge rushing class is this year. I think it's a loaded defensive tackle class as well. So I don't love the depth of the free agency class, but I like a couple options at the top. I love the draft, and I love the in-house players they have. I'm a big Moro Ojomo guy, as you guys know. So I'm really torn. As you guys can tell, I'm almost like going back and forth with myself on this conversation. I am very torn if I would give Milton Williams that $20+ million a year. Right now, if I had to guess if the Eagles are going to bring him back or not, gun to my head, I'd probably say no. If I had to put a percentage on it, I'd say 65% chance he's gone, 35% chance he's staying in Philadelphia. Maybe there's some middle ground that Milton can reach with the Eagles where he's getting close to 20, 17 to 20 a year. It's another backloaded contract with a really young player that you're banking on being worth it when that high salary cap comes down the line, kicking the can down the road. Maybe this is another player that you invest that strategy in. But I don't know. At the same time, I think there's other guys that can replicate Williams' production to a degree because you're always going to have Jalen Carter next to them helping open things up. And you have to give that kind of contract to Jalen Carter at the end of 2025. So you're going to have to pay him. And there's the Jordan Davis fifth-year option that's coming up in May that would pay him over $12 million. Are you going to extend Jordan Davis as well? Is he as good as Milton Williams? No, I'd rather pay Milton. But Jordan Davis is instrumental against the run. Like, he's a huge part of your run defense, and you don't want to get rid of that. I don't know what they do. I would not be surprised either way. But I do think, kind of like Josh Sweat, Howie Roseman said it at the Combine during his press conference, it's going to look different next year. He was preaching patience to the fans. Like, it's going to look a little bit different. They're not going to be able to keep everybody. He alluded to all of the top-tier contracts that he's investing in the offense and just in general players in their prime. You can't pay everybody $20+ million a year, even at premier positions. Like, Mekhi Becton is another guy in this Milton Williams category. Of course, you want to keep a young ascending player coming off a career year at such an important position. Of course you want to keep that guy. Of course. But you can't do that with all 5 offensive linemen, all 5 defensive linemen. This is a really good problem to have, actually. It sucks you're going to lose some of these players, but you want to know why they're losing these players? Because they have a really freaking good team. They have no holes. So that's the problem. You can't pay 22 players, 22 starters, top 10 money at their position. It's just not possible in a salary cap world. Even in a soft cap world where Jeffrey Lurie pays up so much money up front and Howie Roseman can backload all these contracts as the salary cap continues to grow every year, and there are so many different ways to maneuver it like he's done over the last decade. But even in that kind of world, you still can't pay everybody. So I would say, again, gun to my head, there's a 65% chance that Milton Williams is gone, a 35% chance that he does stay. But if you told me the scenario plays out where they prioritize Milton Williams even over a Zack Baun and they keep that player, would I be surprised? No, I wouldn't. Because, again, this is a player you drafted that's young, right in the middle. He's just entering his prime in the second contract. And having elite pass rushing defensive tackles, more than one especially. Not having one is huge. You have 2 in Jalen Carter and Milton Williams, and you might have 3 depending on how Moro Ojomo continues to develop as he heads into year 3. So, but it's a good class. I like Moro Ojomo a lot. I think there's some other cheaper free agent options. I'd say he's gone, but I'm really torn on this. I'm on the fence. It's not like Josh Sweat where I'm thinking he's gone. There's just too many better options, and I just don't think it's worth the money. Milton Williams is absolutely worth the money that he's going to get on the open market. I don't know how he's going to do. This one's going to be interesting. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on X at LockedOnBirds. Let us know as well on our YouTube community page. If Milton Williams is not back in Philadelphia in 2025, who are some alternative options in free agency? We'll get into it as our offseason options series continues right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action, it's just getting started. There's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel. Their live betting feature, it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether you're backing your team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I won some big money yesterday with LeBron James. You never feel like you missed your chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so I think the likelihood that Milton Williams is gone next year is pretty high. Again, he is estimated, his next contract is projected to surpass $20 million annually. And that makes sense. Like, he was statistically, the best pass rusher in football last year at the defensive tackle position. Again, got to give Jalen Carter a ton of credit for that because all the attention goes to number 98, who is the alpha of the Eagles defense. But at the same time, Milton Williams is a great player, and he's going to get a bag, and he's not going to take a pay cut. I mean, maybe he accepts like a few million less to come back to Philadelphia or another contending team versus just going all out and signing with like a Las Vegas Raiders or a Carolina Panthers, a team that just has a ton of salary cap to spend. But I don't know. I don't think he's back. I would again say 65-35 is the percentage chance. 65% chance he's gone, 35% chance that he stays. I don't want to like go lower than that because again, this is the kind of player normally Howie Roseman would prioritize, but they're in such a unique situation where they have such a loaded team with so many young players on a similar life cycle in the NFL on both offense and defense. Like most of the offense entered their prime around the same time, so you had to pay everybody at once. And on defense, you have to project that a lot of those guys are going to be entering contract years at the same time. So you can't pay every single one of these players, even in a soft cap league like the NFL. If Milton Williams is gone, there's not a lot of great options in free agency. Like this is not the edge class yesterday where I'm mentioning, Khalil Mack, Chase Young, of course, maybe trading for Myles Garrett or Harold Landry. You've got a reunion possibility with Hassan Reddick, some more value guys like Malcolm Kuntz or an Azeez Ojulari. There are so many options out there for the edge position in both free agency and then, of course, the draft, which we'll get into up until the end of April. For defensive tackle, there's a couple guys that I like. And you guys, if you did see my offseason simulation podcast from last week, you'll know this name I mentioned from the Kansas City Chiefs, Tershawn Wharton. If the Eagles want to replace Milton Williams in free agency, I think Wharton does make the most sense. He, like Milton Williams, is young, only 26 years old, coming off a career year. 6.5 sacks in 2024. He also had 2 sacks in the playoffs. He was like one of the few good players for the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Wharton was instrumental in shutting down Saquon Barkley, who had his lowest yards per carry average all year. Wharton was one of, if not their best players on the field down in New Orleans a few weeks ago. So Wharton's a guy that makes sense, right? He had a breakout year. I don't think to the level of Milton Williams, but pretty close. Like he had a breakout year. I don't think, though, he'll cost $20+ million a year on the open market like Milton Williams will. So if you want to spend a little bit less and kind of get ahead of a potential breakout for Wharton, like a year too early, I think this is your kind of guy. Like I think this is a player that would make sense, and his strength, he's a little bit undersized. His strength is rushing the passer, but that's what you're looking for because you have Jordan Davis against the run. You have Jalen Carter for run defense and, of course, getting to the quarterback. You have Jalen Carter for everything, including saving your season. You have Moro Ojomo as well and Thomas Booker. It would be nice to add another pass rushing specialist at that position, and that is what Wharton is. So I think of the few free agent options that I like, he's the one that I think I like the most. Tershawn Wharton from the Kansas City Chiefs. Just makes sense from an age perspective, from a style perspective of what his strengths are and weaknesses. I think the Eagles would be interested in him, but I think the Chiefs are going to prioritize trying to bring him back as well, considering the age of like somebody like Chris Jones. There's a couple other guys that are out there that you could keep a close eye on. Another younger player in his prime, Lions defensive tackle Levi Onwuzurike. Yeah, Onwuzurike, I'm gonna go with. There's a couple tongue twisters on the defensive line this year in free agency, but this is another player. Onwuzurike was top 15 last year in pass rush win rate for all defensive tackles. He's in his prime. You look at the Detroit Lions, they just paid Aleem McNeil, who is the guy Tom Donahoe wanted, ironically, instead of Milton Williams. So Are they going to pay 2 defensive tackles? I'm not so sure. They have 2 priority free agents at that position. Detroit, they have their top tier run stopping nose tackle that's on the open market too. So not sure if they're going to pay one of those 2 guys, but that's another player. Again, if I'm going to target defensive tackles to replace Milton Williams, I'm looking for pass rushers like Wharton, like Onwuzurike. You also look out there. I don't love this reunion as much as I did the idea of Hassan Reddick yesterday, but Javon Hargrave is a free agent from the San Francisco 49ers. They let him go after signing a big contract 2 years ago after leaving Philadelphia in 2022, the 2023 offseason. If you want a veteran presence as part of this rotation, again, a good pass rusher, we know that. Hargrave had double-digit sacks for the Eagles in 2022, had 7 sacks for San Francisco in 2023, but I don't love this reunion as much as the Reddick one for a few reasons. Number one, Hargrave is older. He's in his 30s. He's coming off a year where he dealt with injuries, did not play a lot of football in 2024. And I think it'd be awkward. I think culture is an important thing for Philadelphia. I'm not saying he was a locker room cancer, but Javon, he was great in Philadelphia for all those years from 2020 for those 3 seasons he was there. 3 or 4 seasons? I think it was 3 seasons, right? 2020 through 2022. But he did make comments in 2023 about the difference between the 49ers culture and the Eagles culture. And it ruffled some feathers in Philadelphia, and Fletcher Cox kind of fired back at it, just kind of calling the Eagles almost unserious in a way, and it felt like kind of a jab at Nick Sirianni. So I don't know if that would be water under the bridge at this point, a few years later, but I don't love the idea of Javon Hargrave for that reason, for the age, for the injuries. And I just don't, again, I don't love the idea of bringing in a lot of like older, I don't want to go back to the post-2017 era where you're bringing in all these older, cheaper free agents that are ring chasing that are over the age of 30. It worked a couple times. Like Michael Bennett was a really good one in 2018. He had 9 sacks for the Eagles that year. I mentioned him like when talking about, who was I referring to yesterday? One of the veterans that could be, Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack could be like your new version of Michael Bennett. I'm not saying don't pay anybody over the age of 30. I think that could make sense in certain ways. It helped too when you brought in James Bradbury in 2022. But normally this move has not worked out well for the Eagles. Like I'm thinking back to Deshaun Jackson, of course, in 2019, Malik Jackson back in 2019, Anthony Harris in 2021. I don't know. I don't love the idea of bringing in a lot of older free agents. You look at Kevin Byard trading for him in 2023. Yeah, I don't want older, slower players anymore on this team, on offense or defense. And I know you can't have the entire roster be prime players that are young, but I don't know. I don't love the idea of Javon Hargrave. And another guy, I think this is a better veteran option. If you're going to bring in a veteran free agent to rotate through, because it has helped at times. Like I said, Michael Bennett, even in 2022, you brought in Linval Joseph and Ndamukong Suh. If you're not asking them to be like a top 2 player at this position, more so rotational pieces, like what Brandon Graham's been the last few years, and it absolutely can work. I'm not saying don't go for anyone over 30, but it has to be the right fit. Like a Jaron Reed would make sense. And Jaron Reed has gotten better and better every single year as a pass rusher, coming off a really good year in Seattle. The Eagles defensive line coach, Clint Hurt, is very familiar with Reed. Like, that's a move that I'd be okay with. Reed would make sense for the Eagles as that 3rd or 4th guy in the rotation with Jalen Carter, Moro Ojomo, Jordan Davis, Jaron Reed, and Thomas Booker. Like, that's a pretty good group of 5 at defensive tackle. So I like the idea more of a Tershawn Wharton, a younger player at 26 years old, a Levi, Onwuzurike, 2 good young pass rushers on the interior. But if I'm going to go with an older veteran, I would take Jaron Reed over Javon Hargrave. But overall, it's not really a super loaded defensive tackle free agent class. Overall, this year in free agency, it's just not a super sexy class. So the draft for both positions on the defensive line, both edge and interior, I think the draft is going to be the avenue the Eagles take, more so than free agency to replace guys if they have to replace Milton Williams and or Josh Sweat. All right, guys, coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast, the Eagles have a new quarterback coach. I'm going to tell you why I like this hire, and it could help bring new creative ideas to the offense in 2025. We'll get into that coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. All right, guys, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Have some news to report. The Philadelphia Eagles do have their new quarterback coach for 2025, as Kevin Patullo, last year's quarterback coach, promoted to offensive coordinator to replace Kellen Moore. The Eagles today hired former Bowling Green head coach Scott Loeffler as their new quarterback coach. On the surface, initially when I read this news, I didn't love the move. I wanted a younger coach you could kind of develop into another potential offensive coordinator. But the more I think about it, the more I actually do like this move. Like, this isn't a guy, number one, that's likely going to be a head coach. He's an older coach that's been in college football for 3 decades. He could be like I don't want to say your offensive version of Vic Fangio, but he could be an older coach that if he finds success, he's not going to try to move up the ranks too much in the NFL. I mean, maybe he will. Maybe he could be the Eagles' next offensive coordinator if Kevin Patullo has success and then he gets a head coaching job. And that's kind of the trend with Eagles OCs. So if that trend continues, maybe Scott Loeffler is that next guy, and maybe he's not looking to do much more than that. If there is success, like that could be a best case scenario, right? But that's not even really why I like it. I love this move because he comes from a completely different background. Like I said, Scott Loeffler coached in college for 30 years. Like, he's coached so many different quarterbacks, so many different styles of quarterback. He was on Michigan's staff when Tom Brady was there. Like, that's how long this guy's been in the NCAA. He coached Tim Tebow at Florida. He was on the Gators staff with Urban Meyer. So it's kind of interesting to see that the Eagles are bringing in a coach from more of a college background. Like, I like that. And especially when you think about, like, he's coached Tim Tebow and a lot of different rushing quarterbacks in college. I like that because I want new ideas every single year. Like, yes, you want continuity in your offense, and that's why I like having a head coach that calls plays. And it stinks that every year Jalen Hurts has to have a new play caller. But at the same time, like, you want continuity, but you don't want staleness. Every single year, you want new creativity. You want to try to switch things up. Even what you do well, you want to find new ways to maximize that strength. And I like the idea of bringing in Loeffler. Maybe he can help find like new college kind of wrinkles to the rushing attack, to the passing game, just to help Jalen Hurts. Like, that's what I want to see. The Eagles doing what they do best, just in different ways. Maybe you try some more triple option this year with Jalen Hurts. Like, last year's new thing in the run game was the counter read and the draw. Like, yeah, Jeff Stoutland is the run game coordinator. A lot of that's going to go through him and Kevin Patullo and Nick Sirianni. But Loeffler's going to be part of the game planning process now. He's going to be one of Jalen Hurts' go-to guys this year. And I think it's interesting that he comes from solely a college background. But I like it. I want fresh ideas. And normally that doesn't always come with older coaches. But this is a guy that's coached a lot of different styles of player. And the more I've been thinking about the move, I actually am liking it a little bit more. And hey, if it helps you get Harold Fannin, one of my favorite tight end prospects in the draft this year from Bowling Green, who's projected to be probably a 2nd or 3rd round pick, if this helps you do some more homework on him and he comes in to be Dallas Goedert's go-to guy in 12 personnel, the second tight end, that alone, I'm in on this move. But yeah, overall, at first I didn't like it because it's an older coach that's only been in college football. I like the idea of younger guys that can develop into this OC role, kind of have like a pipeline of new coaches if you continue to lose your offensive coordinator to head coaching positions. But this guy, Loeffler, makes sense. Like, it's at least a guy that's not from Philadelphia, from the same kind of system. It's completely different. And again, you need freshness. As A.J. Brown said, you got to adapt or die. You're the hunted now. You're not the hunters. And you got to get better. You got to improve every year, and your offense has to change. You can't be exactly... If you think you can turn around and do exactly what you did last year to win a Super Bowl, this year to win a Super Bowl, then you're going to have some success. Like the 2018 Eagles had success, but their big problem that year was they thought they could just completely run it back in every way imaginable. And instead of winning a championship, they lost in the divisional round, and they struggled to get into the playoffs in general as the 6th seed. They had to win out to get there. So freshness is important, creativity, And the more coaches you can bring in with different ideas, the better. And I like Loeffler here for that position as the Eagles' new quarterback coach. Let me know what you think. Again, hit us up on X at DiBiase LOE. Our YouTube community page is always up as well, 24/7. Thanks as always, though, for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Louie DiBiase signing off. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.